She has been featured on stage at the Aspen Ideal Festival, the inaugural Obama Foundation Summit, and as a guest on the radio program on Being with Krista Tippett. She writes a regular column for her local newspaper, the Daily Post Athean, and has participated in Citizen University Civic Saturday Fellowship. She holds an MA in Appalachian Studies from Appalachian State University and an undergraduate degree in religion and philosophy from Queen's University. Everyone, please welcome Ms. Kimball Cole.
I assume I'm there and and you all can see me. Oh, great. Gosh, I'm so sorry to not be in the room with you all today, but I am privileged to have been able to have listened into the last few speakers who've come up to the podium, and particularly the last speaker whose name I didn't catch, who is serving the eastern coast of Maryland and particularly women and families and children. Those remarks you just gave ought to be, those should be the takeaways, I think, from today, and such an important keynote you just offered us, so thank you so much. There might be one of us out there in the audience that's feeling a little lost or stressed right now or overwhelmed. Count me in to that category. Today I'm not with you all because on Sunday I texted or emailed Charlotte, your executive director, to let her know that my family's been exposed to COVID last week, and we've been in quarantine for just a little bit while we're awaiting negative tests, which should be here tomorrow or Friday, so hopefully, fingers crossed, we're good to go. My two children, Susanna and Lucy, who are 11 and 8, just got their vaccine, so I'm very excited about that, and hopefully we've got a strong shield. But that does make me very sad that I could not travel. And this would have been my first in-person conference since, February 2020, which was, that was the last conference I attended. It was in Atlanta, Georgia. So just to rewind real quickly, I'm Whitney Kimball Co. I'm calling you today from Athens, Tennessee. It's a small town in East Tennessee, in between Knoxville and Chattanooga. It is on the historic lands of the Cherokee and the Chickasaw, and I want to acknowledge that. I grew up here in Athens. I lived here until I was about 18, and I was one of those rural young people who heard the call loud and clear that in order to succeed, in order to advance my life and career, I needed to leave home. And so I packed my bags and went to Charlotte, North Carolina. It was the biggest city I'd ever really been to at that point or lived in. And I was overwhelmed with loneliness as soon as I arrived, to be honest. I had been so engaged in the life of my community in Athens. I was unprepared for the scope and scale of urban life, and also uncertain about what was mine to do in a place like that, and where should I plug in. And I think what I was starting to articulate for myself at that time, when I was 18 years old, was how important each and every community member is in a small town. Every community member holds gifts, skills, and is an asset to the future of a place. And that was the beginning of my understanding of that. So from that point on, I worked really hard to get back to Athens. And I'll move my earrings so that it's not clicking. So I worked really hard to get back to Athens. It took me about a decade. I ended up getting my degree at Queen's. I moved on to Appalachian State University, where they have a really wonderful program called Appalachian Studies. My sense was that if I had some more tools, some more skills to bring back home, that I could improve where I live, and I could also strengthen my ability to participate in the life of my community. So I got a master's in Appalachian Studies and was able to return to Athens when we got broadband, and found that I could work remotely from my home. So that was around 2013 when I finally made it back. In the interim, I was hired by the Center for Rural Strategies, where I still work. So that's 14 years with this organization, which is a pretty small and pretty mighty nonprofit that's located or headquartered in Whitesburg, Kentucky, which are the coal fields of southeastern Kentucky. And Rural Strategies was founded in 2001 as a response to the lack of authentic, compelling, and smart and kind storytelling about rural America. So there was a sense, particularly back then, that rural American communities were not presented in national mainstream news, media, and with policymakers and influential people. The stories that people were hearing were stereotypes, were often dystopian or sometimes overly utopian telling of what it meant to live and work in rural places. So Rural Strategies, in a way, felt the call to respond and to start creating media and campaigns and initiatives that would deepen the narrative about rural people and places. And it would be these stories would be told by rural people for rural audiences as well. I think a lot of what we're experiencing right now in this very modern moment of accelerated news and exchange in the communication sphere is kind of this lack of identity, or wishing for we could figure out what our identity is and how do we connect to all these other pieces and people in the world. And I find that Rural Strategies is really primed for this moment because we've been doing this kind of storytelling for a long time and showcasing the connections, the things that connect rural to urban and urban to rural, and show how our futures are intertwined. So I've been working for Rural Strategies for 14 years. In 2008, I took on the Rural Assembly. That is one of the big projects of Rural Strategies. The Rural Assembly is a sort of network of rural leaders from all 50 states and even some international communities. And we find ways to connect those leaders together to help them talk about the issues that are important, and then to elevate and amplify what they talk about with national influencers and policy leaders and media. So we've been at this for a long time. The other piece of work that we do at Rural Strategies is the Daily Yonder. And maybe some of you all are familiar with Yonder. It is an online rural news publication. And I give you permission, if you're out there in the audience right now itching to look at your phone, I give you permission to look at your phone and go to dailyyonder.com and see what the daily story is today. And also check out ruralassembly.org while you're at it. Feel free to do that as I speak. The main message that I wanted to bring you today is that I am really hopeful about the future of rural America, but I'm also aware that in this time of real acceleration and focus on rural people and places and all of this really great policy that's recently been passed, from the infrastructure bill to the movement of Build Back Better package, that we still have a lot to do and a lot of boxes to check as we think about how we're going to implement all of this money and all of these opportunities that are heading our way. So that's the key message I want to bring to you today, and I wanted to share maybe one or two stories of how I've been thinking about this lately. On Sunday, when my family and I found out we had been exposed to COVID, it was kind of an emotional day. And it was also a day that my dog decided to run a cat up into a tree in our front yard. It was a really cute, fluffy cat, and it ended up really, really high up in that tree, and there was truly no way it was coming down. Although my husband said, let's give it a day and see if it comes down on its own. So we did, but the next morning it was still there, it was still meowing, and it was a distress call, and distressing to an already stressed family. So I Googled, how do you get cats out of the tree? And it said, don't call the fire department. That's just a Disney movie thing. You don't ever call the fire department for that. They've got more important emergencies. So I thought about, well, I could call a tree service. So, I did do that. It was going to be about $700 for them to bring out their big truck. So my husband grabbed our very short ladder, put it up against the tree, and proceeded to climb it to get that cat out of the tree. I think we all are a little bit on the edge right now, and the fact that he did this just blew my mind. And as I watched him climb those limbs, I was thinking, really mad at you right now for putting yourself at risk for this cat. I can't believe you're doing it. But as he grabbed the scruff of the neck of that cat and put it in the shirt that he was wearing and started back down, I was like, man, I love you so much. You are so cool. You are so hot right now. So I had this roller coaster of emotions across the cat down and fed it. The cat's fine, just so y'all know. But it just occurred to me as I was standing at the base of that ladder that this is an analogy for all of the last 20 months in particular, but maybe even longer. If you live and work in rural places, and if you are in tune with the populations that we live among and that we serve, it's just a constant level of ups and downs and feeling sincerely angry and resentful and uncertain about what's coming next. And then hopeful at the same time, and fall in love with your community all over again. These times have brought out a lot of those emotions, I think. So when I think about these pieces of legislation and these big pots of money that are coming to the states that hopefully will trickle in and come in fully to rural communities, again, we're faced with this roller coaster of understanding how do we get the resources that have been earmarked for these places. Going back to a local experience, also last week I was watching our public works department come outside of our house and suck up all the leaves that we had raked to the edge of our yard. It took many weeks to rake those leaves over and over again to get them to the edge, and to know that our city was going to take it from there to suck them up and take them off was a big relief. And I think that's also where we are with Build Back Better in particular. We've worked to this point, all of us as rural advocates, and in partnerships and in collaboration, we've worked up to that point, and now we've got this opportunity to have it move at an even more accelerated pace forward. So I think my call to action today is if you haven't given some thought to how you're communicating with rural leaders in those communities about the funds that are potentially coming, or how we're going to implement them in an equitable way, that now's the time to really be thinking about that. And fingers crossed, we cross that finish line by the end of the year. If we could, for just a moment, I brought a video that I wanted to share. There are two pieces in this Build Back Better plan that I think Rural Strategies has spent some time trying to build awareness of and do some educating around. And those are the tax credits, the extendable or expanded tax credits that are coming out of that package. One is the child tax credit, and one is EITC. And I wanted to give you a sort of snapshot of how Rural Strategies is approaching doing some educating around what those are, why they're so important, and also issue a call to any and all who are willing to help support keeping those as part of the Build Back Better package. So let's run that video, and then I'll say just a few more words.
You may already be familiar with the child tax credit, but a lot of Americans have never heard of the Earned Income Tax Credit. The EITC is a powerful tool to help lift low-wage workers and their families out of poverty, but it has its limitations, like excluding young people and workers without children. In 2018, the EITC moved 5.6 million individuals out of poverty. Unfortunately, young adults under the age of 25 were not eligible for these gains. The good news is that the American Rescue Plan extended the EITC to include both childless workers and those young adults, which means more people have access to this important tax credit. And it turns out that these extensions especially help rural communities, affecting 21% of workers without children in rural areas versus 17% in metropolitan areas. The bad news? This historic extension of both tax credits is set to expire at the end of the year. That's where you come in. In the coming weeks, Congress will decide whether to make these changes permanent in the pending reconciliation bill. Contact your representatives today and tell them that we can't lose this important expansion of this benefit for rural communities and people around the country.
Thanks for playing that video. I just wanted to share it in part because to give you a sense of some of the work that Rural Strategies is up to these days, outside of the Daily Owner and outside of Rural Assembly gatherings and convenings. We're also trying to keep watch of the kinds of pieces of policy and programs that could make all the difference in small towns in rural places across the country. That video was made when the EITC was part of the reconciliation bill. There was talk of making it permanent. At this point, the suggestion is that it would be just extended for another year, so that would be a whole other piece of work in the coming year. But our hope is that it will at least stay in the Build Back Better legislation. So if you're so moved and you're on the Rural Assembly website right now, you can endorse that message, and we're sharing it with some key folks on the Hill and in specific states. I wanted to end by just telling you for a moment about a conversation I had last week with somebody in my local context, a young grassroots organizer whom I'd been wanting to meet for a while and got to have coffee with. He was talking to me about the need to reestablish or rebuild the muscles that we know already exist in our communities around local organizing, local efforts to secure the kind of funding that we know we need, to make sure that we're heading toward the solutions that we know work for our community. I think we have in some ways lost that muscle, not just because of the pandemic, but over time, of having some losses as opposed to more wins. And so my friend Austin was just telling me about, picking any issue, but actually spending the time talking to people individually and rallying them around that issue is one way to start rebuilding that muscle. And I think in the coming months that's where we're at. We're going to have to do a lot of that work of linking arms again, finding one another again, sitting down and having those conversations again, really listening to one another, and even for small gains on the way to something bigger. So I think that's what I've got to offer you this morning. But I'm really sorry I'm not there in person, and I so enjoyed all that I've heard all the way to this point, and I hope you continue to have a really wonderful